right. So, Glen Eberle, what a legend, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk to me today.
Well, thanks, Dale. Thanks for coming over. You've made the long trip to come to Idaho to see me, and you call me a legend, and I kind of wonder why. But anyway, I'm happy to visit with you, and thanks for making the trip over.
Yeah, it's amazing what you've built here. It's really incredible. I mean, I know you had a great team working with you, but to see that go from, we're here at the headquarters of Eberlestock, and just to see, I'm sure what I can imagine was just like an idea in your mind at some point, and then building that all the way up to what it is now it had to have just been wild to experience.
It's been a good journey. It's been, it started a long time ago when I was a kid in college, and in my mind's eye, I had this idea of this gear company that I could one day build, or I should one day build. And I'd done some work in design that had led me to kind of think about, conquering the world. I was like, I can do it. And then I had just sort of a long, colorful life and it distracted me from that for a while. I became a pilot, first in the Air Force, and then for United Airlines for a while. And so those things consumed the 80s and 90s, and so in the early 2000s, I was just actually thinking about simplifying my life a little bit. Got out of the Air Force, was flying for United, and going, well, do I want to hang out for the half the time that I have off, or do I want to build this gear company that's in my head? And as I was sort of processing that stuff, September 11th happened, and I was a junior United captain that day, and then I woke up going, oh shoot, my life just changed, and really, I felt that the job was very vulnerable. The company I was working for was very vulnerable, and I was also just pissed off. I was one of the like many Americans that day, woke up and went, hey, that's just not right, that thing that happened. And so my first impulse was to rejoin the military, and I was going to go back to the squadron and go drop bombs on those people that did that. And then prudence got the better part of me, and I realized that I had something really valuable in my head in terms of this company that I'd sort of had constructed, this idea of it, and decided to pursue that. But literally on September 11th, 2001 was the day that I decided to begin to make real the journey that I'd begun in 1985, all those years before. So
yeah, that's fascinating. I think one thing that stands out about what you've done, the many things you've done, is that each one could be considered like a lifetime pursuit. So whether it's like to be an Olympian in a biathlon, to be a fighter pilot, to be an entrepreneur. And I'm really looking forward to getting into all of that, because I'm sure there's a lot of valuable lessons, that you can draw from that. Yeah, especially sure. I think, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and you've got the end of the Cold War, we win, and then after that it felt like a lot of optimism. It felt like you could do anything was possible. And then fast forward well into the 21st century, and I think a lot of the younger people are feeling a little more cynical and not necessarily feeling that they're going they have the ability to accomplish all of these types of things. So it'd be just really cool to kind of unpack how you're able to do a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'd hope that if the young people you're talking about that are out there, I look at it too, and I sense that there are a lot of people that are lost, or that don't have kind of that tangible hold onto what we used to call the American dream. What made this country what it is the ability to make something of yourself, regardless of where you came from and the resources at your disposal. You could, if you did the right thing, build a company. I mean, I was recently talking to a young man who is far ahead of me, in terms of his life progress and in the entrepreneurial journey. He's 29 years old and has got real estate ventures going, and a big gym equipment supply company with a cool brand, and he's well regarded. And as I was listening to him and talking to him, I was like, gosh, good for you, man. It's so cool, because he just saw the the passion for it. And he started, his business by selling T-shirts out of the trunk of a car, while working for another company.
Yeah.
And then eventually that turned into, enough volume and demand that he saw ways to build out from it. And he built out pretty quickly a significant, company, and started by selling T-shirts out of the trunk of his car. So that sort of thing tells you that, and he's, 29 years old now, or maybe 30 if he's had a birthday since, I talked to him a few months ago, but he's young, and a great example of somebody who, didn't allow the negative discourse in the country to kind of slow him down. And really, I think, again, I live in Idaho, and I live in a place where I just don't even think about what, I pay attention to politics because I object to the destruction of our country that I seem to be see happening around us. And so, I monitor that. But other than that, I'm a little bit more disconnected than than most, and probably than I should be. But my sense is, like you made a remark earlier about the fact that young people are sort of, feeling lost or feeling like the American dream isn't available to them. And I think that's a real shame and travesty and tragedy. And I think it's something, though, that, good people can correct. I feel like there's an awakening in America right now. And part of that certainly should be a sense of, teaching people the old traditions, that are the old virtues, that include self-reliance, self-motivation, building self-esteem through success and failure. Because you have to have, you don't get to success without some failure, but you don't let failure slow you down. You learn from it, and you decide, okay, I'm going to do better next time, and I'm going to do that differently. And so, I do feel like, in this last part of chapter of my life now, I feel like I'm going to be an old man looking at some young people but if I can be a voice that tells them that they should, follow their passion and follow their dreams and find a way to, to make things happen, the ideas in their head, that sort of thing's available to anybody in this country. It should be.
Yeah, I think entrepreneurship could be a good avenue for people, for young people too, because is a lot of these institutions kind of calcify, and it's just a shame, again, not to make this just a big complaining session, but you see like what's happened to NASA, and they just, their astronauts just had to be rescued from SpaceX, right?
Right.
And so these institutions that we revered so much growing up, maybe they're not operating. They're not operating at the level that we always remembered.
Right.
And maybe these avenues aren't necessarily available to you, but there's no limit to entrepreneurship. It's just your ideas, your energy, right? And you could, there's no one preventing you from making that happen if you have a good idea.
Yeah. And I think, people often think that it requires a lot of money to start a business. And at some point it requires, something, depending on the type of business. If we go back to the example of the fellow who, sold T-shirts out of the trunk of his car until he had enough cash flow to expand into other things, that's actually the barrier to entry to some businesses is pretty low. In my case, I started Eberlestock with $1,500, to build my first prototype, and that was a pretty good deal back in the day. Then I had to borrow money to pay for the first production of backpacks, and was able to borrow money because I had some equity in a house, so basically turning home equity into product and back and forth until I cycled that enough times that I didn't have to borrow from the house anymore to buy backpacks. Yeah,
that's true belief. I mean, because if that doesn't work out, that's where you live, right?
I know. Yeah, so you're just putting something on the line. It was a funny thing, I had this grand plan in my head and a really cool design, and I'd been with my first prototype backpack to the buyers at sporting goods stores, and they got excited when they saw it because they'd never seen anything like it. And we're talking, now I started in 2001. It was 2003 before I had my first kind of commercial production coming. And so as I was getting ready for the fall of 2003, I was super excited. So 21 years ago, I had all, the first stuff coming in, and And I took a prototype out to the stores to, see what they thought and so the best story was, at the time, the big box company, Sportsman's Warehouse, had 14 stores in the Western United States. And the headquarters were outside of Salt Lake. And I made an appointment with the backpack buyer and went down there and sat down with this fellow, Jim Durfee. And we're sitting across the table and he's looking at my pack. He's like, gosh, this is really cool. It's really unique to see something so unique. And so he was, very encouraging. And he pulled out this book with as I say, there were 14 stores and they had this thing where you could basically press through, so many layers of copy to make copies of what you're writing. And the old fashioned, whatever that kind of paper was called, the pressure print paper. And so he starts writing purchase orders, and marking which stores were going to get the product. And I had one design that first year. And so he, asked me what my company name was, and I tell him what I just named this company. And then, the address was my home address. The phone number was my cell phone number. And, and then we get down to, he goes, well, okay, so what are you going to name your pack? What are you going to call it? And I said, I think I'm going to call it the Just One pack, because if you're going to own just one hunting pack, this is the one to own. And he's like, oh, that's a good name, so Just One. He goes, what's the SKU? And I go, what's a SKU? And so he tells me that, standard whatever unit. And I was like, okay, well, how about J1? He goes, okay. Oh, well, we're going to do two colors though, so we added a suffix for the colors. And so we J1 something and J1 something, and he writes this thing out, and I walk out of there with, copies of purchase orders in my pocket. And I was so excited, man. I felt like, okay, I'm on the run. And the first production I did was 400 packs. And I thought, oh, I can sell those on a weekend in Boise, and as they came in, I was, in the early days of the internet, trying to figure out how you communicate with people. It was pre-social media, and I didn't have a clue, so it took me a lot longer to sell those 400 packs than I thought it was going to. Yeah, they were all over the garage.
Stack up in the garage, yeah.
And then, of course, the thing I learned early on is the curse of any designer is that you put so much passion and effort into any one product that by the time that it actually arrives and physically, the production finally gets to you, you're kind of sick of it. You want to do the next thing. And so the first one, I was like, okay, it's good, but I think, I learned some things from it, and I really was excited about the second production. And so, that was, going 2003-4 was the first year. In the winter of 2004, I was at the SHOT Show, which is the shooting industry's big trade show. And I had a little 10 by 10 booth with a cement floor, and everything around me is all fancy with carpeted and stuff. And me and my wife were there just, selling packs, and she didn't know anything about it, and wasn't a hunter, didn't have, but by the end of the thing, she was showing people how you can pull the gun out of the scabbard, and she kind of did a good job and was into it. And then, but we had a, crowd around the booth the whole time because our product was so unique and nobody had ever seen anything like it. And so really that, as far as messaging to entrepreneurs, I think we all have insights about something where you go, that could be better. Or I have this idea of this thing that could, and that's really what my thing was in my case, I'd had a lot of ideas, but one of them that really felt like it was going to work was this hunting pack. Cause I'd been building my hunting packs for myself for years through the 90s. And I'd go into the sporting goods store each fall to buy ammo and a hunting license, and I'd look at the hunting packs, and God, there's still, everybody just made bags with straps that were in camouflage. They were basically old traditional style backpacks. And so I was like, there's still nobody doing it, man. Still nobody making a good hunting pack. And I was like, oh, so then when I decided to do it, I ran out and looked in the stores. I was like, okay, there's nobody doing it. So I, started writing, with a lot of passion and focus then, but I could have started a lot sooner, and the company would have moved a lot faster and further had I done so, because it really doesn't take that much to start a business, and it, other than focus and passion and a lot of, effort and sweat equity, I worked my tail off for years before I could put food on the table with it. And so that's part of it. I was fortunate to have a job. I worked for United Airlines until 2008. So, hanging on as an airline pilot while I was building this company was part of my, with the recipe for making it work, thankfully.
Yeah. I think it's a theme you see a lot of, from a lot of successful entrepreneurs is that self-belief. I mean, I remember hearing an interview with Cam Haynes recently, and he's talking about his very similar story about how he believed he had knowledge to share about like backcountry bow hunting. Yeah. So he, bought 1,000 copies of his hardcover book, and then they just sat in his garage for the next decade as he sold one, two at a time. But he always believed and never gave up, and look where he is now.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, have you? Did you grow up as a hunter? Is it something?
I grew up north of here in a little town called McCall, and my dad was really an interesting guy. I mean, he was a pilot also, which had nothing to do with the reason why I ended up flying airplanes, but it was sort of, there was an idea. And then, but he had, enough time off as an airline pilot that he was a rancher and had, a few ranches. And we, like we were talking earlier about cow-calf operations. Well, I grew up in that world and, raising cattle and calves. And then in the fall, he was skier in the winter and a sailor in the summer, and then worked these ranches. And in the fall, he was never really a super passionate hunter, but he wanted to show it to me, so he taught me how to shoot and took me out to chase deer on the ranch. And the first time I ever went deer hunting was with my dad and on his ranch in the Salmon River country, and a steep little canyon of a ranch. And he had this old rifle that he'd had since he was a kid. It was a 30-40 Krag, which is a, old, World War I era shoulder fired, rifle. And hard steel plate for the butt plate and a hard hitting gun when you pull the trigger. It kind of terrified me, but I shot enough by that time that I felt like, okay, I could do it. So 14 years old, we get to the ranch, before dawn, and it's just as it's getting light, I'm walking across this field and in this canyon bottom, and I'm looking up at this ridge above, and my dad and brother were going up the other way across the canyon, up the other side of the mountain on the other side. And I look up and I see these two muley bucks skylined, pretty far up there. But they were up there standing there, and they're looking down at me. And I'm like, gosh, man, if they're going uphill, I'll never see them again. I just kind of knew. So I was like, well, I guess I got to try. So this rifle had a peep sights with a little post with a little round front post on the front and a peep sight in the back. And I remember putting the rifle on the covering what looked like the bigger of the two deer, the one in front, and the dot covers the deer. That's how far away the deer was. So I'm like, pull it down, and I raise it back up a little bit, kind of thinking, well, if it's far enough away that I got to do that, and pull the trigger, and this deer, that I've been aiming at, kind of startles and turns around and runs away, and I'm like, shoot, obviously I missed him, so I do the same thing with the other one. I cover him and I lift up a little bit and pull the trigger, and he does the same thing, and I'm like, shoot, so I go running around the hill, looking for their tracks, and I come around the bottom of the hill and I can't find any tracks, and I'm like, oh, they must have gone up this draw. So I start going up that, and as I get up a little ways, I came to a little plateau, and I look across, and there's a deer lying there dead. And I'm like, oh, geez. I yell across the canyon, my Dad, I got one. and then it clicks in my head. I'm like, wait, that really looked the same. I did exactly the same thing with both, and they both did exactly the same thing. And so I'm like, I look down the bottom of the hill, and there's the other one lying in the fence. I'm like, oh, geez, Dad, I got
that's
two.
Hilarious.
Yeah, and they were both hard shots. I mean, it was the craziest thing. And so they both, that was my first hunting experience. And that was, an amazing one for a 14-year-old kid, of course. And it gave me a certain amount of confidence as a marksman. But also, I've had enough, events that didn't go that way since then that I can't pretend that it's always so good, but at the same time, and of course, my little brother was pissed because we had to use his tag on my deer. I'm like, I don't know. But,
that's hilarious.
Anyway, that was how we started.
Yeah. So, is this when you started skiing out here in McCall too?
No, I grew up in Colorado, and my dad and mom were both, as I said, my dad was really an outdoorsman and kind of brought the family into his world of that. So he was really passionate about skiing his whole life. and as was my mother, and so we started skiing I started skiing when I was 2 years old, and we ski raced in Colorado as a kid, and then we moved to Idaho when I was 12, and it was in McCall that I was, we did everything, called four-way skiing, but two kinds of alpine racing, giant slalom, and a ski jumping, and a cross country race would be the typical weekend's race, and so we did all that stuff, and I was a little bit better at cross country skiing because I was a skinny stick man of a kid, didn't have a lot of muscle, and anyway, so I was a good cross country ski racer, and there was a guy from the local town up there that had done the Olympic sport of biathlon, where you ski and shoot, and so he was a childhood hero of ours, the few of us in the town that cross country skied thought he was pretty cool, and then that sport looked really fun and cool as compared to just ski racing, which cross country skiing is a beautiful sport, but it can be a little bit it's one of those where it's different psychologically because to hammer around a course for 40 minutes or an hour or longer, depending on how long the race is, where you're just ski racing, is fun, but it takes a long time, and there's a whole mental thing that plays out that's solely about that, conserving energy in the right places and hammering down in the right places and beating whoever's around you, and it's a fun sport, but I don't know that I was really wired for the duration of it. It was something that really, it's like a marathon race versus a sprint. I probably was more, I had the attention span more for sprinting, I think. And I was pretty fast also for shorter distances. But the way that biathlon worked, it turned out, was that there was just something about, sticking a rifle on your back and then having to stop periodically during a ski race to shoot. It first of all broke up the monotony of a ski race, but also it added this whole crazy interesting thing that was completely different than a regular ski race. And so it was much more interesting, much more, intellectual, I guess. There was a lot more thought that went into how, how you're going to strategize for coming into the range and getting the targets down and getting out, as quickly as possible. And it was fun, really a fun sport. So as I said, I had a mentor when I was a kid that was from the local town that sort of set the standard, and then another guy up there that, taught us kids how to shoot 22s and got us some, guns to shoot. And then each year there would be like one race that we'd go to we were cross country ski racers, but there would be one race at the junior national championships. It was a biathlon race, and I did well at that. So that by the time I was, I guess, a junior in high school, I'd gotten the attention of the U.S. national team coaches, and they were looking for upcoming talent, and so they named me onto the junior national biathlon team, and I was super excited, man. I got a jacket that said USA on the back, and I was like,
that's super cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. And then so that was when I was a junior. The next winter, when I was a senior in high school, I made the traveling team to go to the World Championships. And so that was the first year that I was, I went to the big league races in Europe. It was in Finland. And that was an introduction to a whole nother thing that, because in the US, biathlon was then, it's still an obscure sport, but in the 80s, it was really an obscure sport of the 70s. And so, but when we went to Europe, they had stadiums that they would fill up with, like it's a national sport, rivals ice hockey for the most popular winter sport in Russia. In Scandinavia, it's, these stadiums draw huge crowds. And so you go to World Championships in Europe and huge passionate crowds of fans are cheering for their team and booing you and whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that all for me began in, I guess 1979 or 80. Started traveling with the team.
Such a cool sport. Like,
yeah,
to me, it's like a throwback to what comes to mind when I watch it is like the the winter wars in World War II.
Yeah,
and that's probably I would
that's
imagine why
that's where it came from. It's funny in Scandinavia where cross country ski racing started. They say that the first ski races were biathlon races because they were staged between, first of all, that sort of the hunting community in Scandinavia, and then also the winter warfare guys. They took a lot of pride in their ability to ski cross country and stop and shoot guns, and so the sport was right there with ski racing all the way along as it came into the Olympics, and so Yeah.
So is that when you first started getting like signal that you might have an elite level talent at this sport when they're recruiting you to these teams?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I first, you have to grow into it. I mean, it was intimidating to go, from a little town in Idaho where the biggest crowd I'd ever, had cheering in a ski race were the other people in the ski race that are not, that are waiting alongside, to a world championship where there were a lot of people, and it was pretty wild. That you felt pretty small when the first time I did it, and so it took me a couple of years to get enough kind of courage to feel like I was going to be able to to compete at that level someday. So I had to build into that, certainly physically, and then also kind of psychologically and mentally. But then what happened when I guess where my story gets interesting as far as biathlon goes was when I started the sport, the rifles that we carried were pretty heavy. They were basically just a target rifle. And if you think about target rifle shooting, target rifles are like 18 pounds plus, and they're designed to be kind of heavy and have stability so that you can stand, or, so your body tremors don't move the rifle very much. There's sort of this inertia from the weight. And that school of thought had also existed in biathlon. You think about it, you're, standing on skis and in a skin tight suit in the wind and holding a rifle and trying to shoot it. People wanted a heavier gun for it to be steady. But they were basically just standard target rifles. And once in a while you'd take a wreck on a ski race. And if you took a wreck with a rifle on your back, 9 times out of 10, you'd stand up and the rifle would be broken in half at the pistol grip, because there was a short grain that came across with the shape of the pistol grip, and really easy to break the gun stock. And if you did, your race is over, and you got to either glue your rifle stock back together, or figure out how to fix it, or buy another one. And so as that happened to me, I was going to college in the early 80s, and I didn't have a ton of money, and the college had a really good workshop, and I thought, I think I can build my own rifle stock, and I'll try to make it stronger, and it'll be cheaper, for me to make one rather than buy another $500 rifle stock. And so I started working on gun stocks in the basement of the Dartmouth College, student workshops, and in doing that, I thought, I really researched how to make it stronger, and so it was sort of the early days of carbon fiber, and I discovered that carbon fiber combined with a wood that's from your part of the world, Sitka spruce, in combination in a laminate makes a really strong 3D, structure. And so I started working with carbon fiber and Sitka spruce in different shapes, and then I thought, well, I think I can make this thing lighter also. I'm making it super strong, so I can take some weight off of it. I think we can still shoot a lighter weight gun. So the rifles, when I started, weighed 11.5 pounds in 1985 and 6 when I was doing that project. So we went into the 86 World Championships with 7.5 pound guns. We took 4 pounds. I took 4 pounds off the weight of the gun. And so in 86, by that time I was a, mature athlete, and, feeling like I had enough, horsepower to break in, and I'm thinking about medaling, and now we had these secret weapons. The American team showed up with these great, really cool, badass rifles that nobody else had anything like. And all the Europeans were looking at us like, oh, look what the Americans have. It was, this like, so the Eberlestock, sort of became famous that year. And I'd made him for the whole U.S. team. And we all could ski. You take 4 pounds off your back, you can ski a ton faster. Like there was a guy from Nike who did a physiological, estimate of how much faster you could see. He figured it was more than a minute in a 20K ski race. Well, you see, our results went from middle of the pack to upper part of the pack, that winter, and they've been there ever since. And so the Europeans governing body tried to, all the other athletes were complaining about the Americans cheating because we had these lightweight rifles, and we're like, hey, we're not cheating. You can make them too.
It's called the innovation.
Yeah. But one day this German guy looked at it, and I remember him saying, that looks very American. And I'm like, you're darn right, buddy. It is American. This is what Americans do. We innovate. And so Yeah. So they actually made a rule that said you couldn't have a rifle stock with holes in it because I had a skeletonized butt and all that stuff. And we're like, oh, we fought that off. It's like, you can't say we can't use what we already have. And so, the end of that conversation was, okay, how much does that thing weigh? And we said 7.5 pounds. And so then that became the floor weight of the Olympic class biathlon rifle. And so that number still stands. They weigh rifles and they can't weigh less than 7.5 pounds, 3.3 kilos.
I've heard some corners, they call that the Eberle rule.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if they still do, but they used to call it that, now like most things, people have long forgotten that I did that, but it's kind of fun. It was that, that experience is what really made me feel like I could make an impact in the world and influence, really change the way people did things. And so that project led me to an industrial design course in college that led me to, make my first hunting rifle, lightweight hunting rifle stocks with the same technology and a whole different geometry, really cool rifles. And so I made, think about how much has changed. I mean, here I was a college kid in a college student workshop making hunting rifles,
I know, I'm just picturing that at Dartmouth.
Yeah,
like what that would look like today.
Yeah, I don't think they do that anymore. But for me, it was pretty cool. I went back there years later, like for 25th reunion or something like that, and walked into the student workshops, and these two old men look at me and they go, "Hey, that's Glen Eberle," and they were all excited. They went, "Yeah, hey man, when you left, you left a bunch of stuff in the trash. We pulled them out. They still had the rifle stocks." I thought that was kind of fun. But
that's super cool,
fun to be remembered. But anyway, yeah, that whole project was where my design awakening was. That's where I started to think, about the other things that could be better, and I started making lists of things that you could do that we, so, and back to the, who can do it and what's an entrepreneurial journey look like. Anybody can do it, you can be looking at a toothbrush and think of, I think I can make it something better than this. There's a better way for all sorts of things. And I think we all have these little insights, these moments of, of clarity where we think this could be different, this could be better. And that's when, if you pursue it, if there's a market for it, then you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was the 84 Olympics like? I'm picturing back to kind of like the height of the Cold War.
Yeah.
It was Soviet Olympic program was insane then.
Yeah, it's really true. In fact, so backing up, the second time I went to the World Championships was in Russia, and it was in actually Belarus and White Russia. So, but at the time it was inside the USSR. Well, Belarus was a satellite of Russia, but inside the USSR. And so the experience of going there at the height of the Cold War was pretty wild. It was pretty cool. I mean, I actually somewhere in my stuff have there were two newspapers in Russia at the time. One was called Izvestia and the other one was Pravda. And as I recall, Izvestia meant news and Pravda meant truth in Russian. And they used to have a saying that said there's no truth in the news and no news in the truth. No Izvestia in Pravda, no Pravda in Izvestia. But anyway, Pravda was their national newspaper.
Right.
They're USA Today. And on the back cover or the back page of Pravda one day, there was a picture of me, with this Russian guy racing up this hill. There's America versus USSR, and of course the Soviet crowds. Over 100,000 people came out to watch the races. So these huge crowds, and they'd be whistling, as the Americans are coming by, and then the Russians are like, every time they take a pole plant, they'd be like, ho, ho. So you've got people going, chanting, to push the Russians on and whistling at the Americans and like crazy, like intimidating environment. But it was really pretty fun. And then to really, you definitely got a sense of the police state then. It was just kind of almost creepy and eerie to be inside Russia at that time, especially I think in winter and the place where we were. It was grim and bleak, and it was really, you felt the weight, the oppression around you. So then leap forward 2 years to the 84 Olympics. They were in Yugoslavia, and Yugoslavia was an interesting country. It never fully cemented itself into it was behind the Iron Curtain, but it was sort of on the fringe, and it was never like fully enveloped in the USSR the way that, Romania and places like that were. And even, a lot of, I'd say Poland was probably the most kind of harnessed Eastern Bloc country, but a lot of the other ones, there was a little bit of like, wistfulness for the West, I guess. And like I remember being in Bulgaria on one of those trips, and they had Coca-Cola, and they were so proud to serve you Coca-Cola. So each meal they'd bring you a Coca-Cola, and then you could see the waiter was like, "Well, you get a Coca-Cola.
Here you go."
And, so we're like, for breakfast, I don't really want one, but But anyway, and then so Yugoslavia was really interesting in that. They were very proud culturally of the fact that there were 4 nationalities, within the country. And so the Serbs, the Croats, the whoever else, the Bosnians and the Herzegovinians, I think they were. So, they were like, oh yeah, we're brothers, even though he's a Muslim and I'm a Christian. And it was and then, it wasn't many years later, 8 years later, when they were at war with each other, and, throats were being cut. And a lot of that happened right, in Sarajevo. So watching the Olympic experience was amazing. Being in the stadium, and the opening ceremonies were really cool, and there's just a lot of fun stuff there. And it was a beautiful, fun event. And to watch what happened afterwards was sort of, made you think about people.
Yeah,
in the way of the world.
Yeah, you think of the more you travel, especially if you're military, and witness these things, you realize that. Civilization is something that's worth protecting, because once that goes, it can get really ugly. That was
no kidding.
It was just tragic.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So how did your races go in '84?
They went well. It was interesting, actually. I was a young guy. I was at the time the youngest American, I think, to have made the elite team to go to the Olympics. Just there have been younger guys since, but I think I was the first. Whatever I was, 21-year-old. Most guys had a little more experience, but I was one of the best guys. I was like number 3 or 4 on the team, depending on the day. And I'd proven myself, through the course of the winter. I was the fastest off the start, so I usually led the relay. And so I'd qualified for 2 of the 3 events at the Olympics going into the Olympics, and raced the 20-kilometer race, which actually went really well. I've seen, imagery of it since then, and go, oh yeah, I remember that, and actually I skied decently. I wasn't the strongest guy at the time, but I was still building myself, and I had a good ski race, but I shot really well. It was a snowy, tough, like sideways snow blowing day. And I was the 4th best shooter, I think, which didn't win me a medal, but it was, put me up further in the rankings than I would have been otherwise. And it was something to be proud of, and so I felt good about it. I was pretty excited when it was done, and my coaches were really proud of me. But then my coaches told me, well, it's this other guy's last Olympics, because he's going to retire. And so even though you've qualified for the relay team, we're going to have him run it, because you're going to have another chance. And I was like, so heartbroken. I was like, what do you mean? I've made that team. I've qualified for it. I should be leading it. And you've just told me that you're going to put him in because he's retiring, and I'm going to have, and so I was sort of bitter about it. It was a bummer, to have that happen in the middle of the Olympic Games.
You kind of think of that as the ultimate meritocracy.
Yeah, so it really is supposed to be, and they really couldn't justify it. It was strange, one of those things where they couldn't really look you in the eye and tell you why they were doing it, and it was tough. It was a tough pill for me to swallow. I never really forgave them for it. Oh yeah, you have to. But I was always like, hey, because as it turned out, I went. But each year I elevated, and I was doing better and better, and I was getting stronger and stronger. And so me and a buddy of mine who won a silver medal in the '87 World Championships, we're sort of like pushing each other at the lead of the head of the pack in the U.S. team. And so we were gunning for the '88 Olympics, which were in Calgary, and I was pretty, I was thinking I was going to win a medal there, and I had a shot at it, just like Josh had won a medal at the year prior at the World Championships. And I was like, it's my turn. So I was really pretty excited, and then you have to make the team, and so I'd made for 7 years running, I'd made the traveling team, and I was always just walked on. It was it was something you just assumed was going to happen, but in '80. The trials for the '80 Olympics, it was almost like the hand of God was just going, no, not so fast. pal, because just every little thing happened that cumulatively were enough to just keep me off the team. So I didn't make the 88 team, and had so many opportunities in the course of the races that the Olympic trials, any one of several things that went badly if one of those things hadn't happened, any one of them, I'd have been on the team. And so after four really, all in ski races, I knew I was close and I felt like I'd made it. And I'll give you an example. There was this crazy Norwegian coach. It was a good guy, but somebody had told him that I'd spent most of my summer building rifle stocks and I hadn't been training that hard, which wasn't true. I'd been building rifle stocks, but I also been training hard. And that's a silly thing to tell a coach, but it was just this guy that used to do things like that, and so he kind of sabotaged me with my coach. And I never really found out until I found out later that it had been something like that had been said about me. But still, you make the team or you don't. You can ski fast. If you've trained well, you ski fast. And so I felt like I was in good shape, but I'd had for years this one ski company that sponsored me, and they were great skis, but they just give you a few, and you always felt like you're kind of, come on. And then there were other people that get like 12 pairs of skis, and they get jackets and stuff. And so the swag made me go, hey. And so this guy, a rep for some other ski company, offered me like a dozen pairs of skis and a bunch of fancy swag. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm getting sponsored, So I took all that, and the skis he gave me were the slowest damn skis. And so it matters, if you get skis that are fast and you can glide, it's a huge difference than if you're on something that just doesn't want to move. And anybody who's skied and has skis that don't want to move knows what I'm talking about. It's just like that. Just sometimes they just don't go. So I had a dozen skis, and I'm working my butt off to try to get the bases perfect so that they'll ski, so they'll glide. And I'd go out for the morning glide tests, and I'd go and some other guys would go zzz, and I'd be like, oh gosh, I'm screwed. So I still was really close, even though guys had the wrong people had the advantage of me with having fast skis, and I should have had fast skis. It was a silly thing. I think by the fourth race, I threw those things away, and I went and got one of my old pairs. Was like, okay, now I can go. But the other thing that happened is that odd thing where my coach, as I was coming out of the range, you kind of get in this Zen zone where you come in transition from ski racing, and you're going to go lay down, and you're going to shoot, or you're going to stand there and shoot, one of the two. And so I was just coming to the range, and I was getting ready to shoot, and this Norwegian guy, Sigvart Bjantegard, steps right in front of me, and he puts his face right in my face, and he goes, "Go, Glenn, you can do it." And I'm like, whoa. And it was the weirdest thing, because it wasn't, you never do that. And, and he purposely did it to throw me off.
Yeah.
And I was like, that son of a bitch, so, I had to kind of maneuver around him, and I go over and I ski, and I end up settling my brain back and trying to get back in the zone. And I think I missed two of the bullets on that. There's 5 shots, and you have 1 bullet for each one. But one of them, the two bullets in those trials did this, where they were like half bullets. It's like basically to make the target turn from black to white to hit it. More than half the bullet has to go into the black. If it's less than half, it's like a split bullet on the rim. The target won't go down. And so I had 2 split bullets where like the bullet it's this close, and any one of those would have put me on the team. And so in the end of all that, I was after the last race, I was like, okay, I think I did it. And I was trying to get myself back settled down to, why am I even worried about this kind of a thing? And then I'm going to get myself thinking about Calgary and traveling and all that. And a guy who I'd bumped off the 84 team came and knocked on my door, and he came in and he goes, "Hey man, I hate to tell you this, but you didn't make the team." And, I was like, oh, and so, he and I sat down and had a big long cry together. And at the time it was just brutal, cause I identified as an Olympian, as a biathlete. And I was just, my heart and soul were all focused on the 88 Olympics. And I had that sort of, reparation to make after the 84 games, where I felt like, okay, that was all bullshit, but this time it's going to go my way. And to have it taken away, being able to go, was really difficult for me to absorb. And this guy's name was John Ruger, and Rugs goes, he goes, "Well, it was really hard for me. And I'll tell you, I always thought of myself as an Olympian, as a biathlete, and that was how I kind of identified myself. And I realized I really had to kind of reassess and go, no, I'm John Ruger and I do biathlon, but it's not, who I am. And I was like, that's good. That's a really, wise thing to think through. And I was always grateful for him to tell me that. And that really led me to look at it and go, well, I'm actually grateful that I didn't make that team. It was because had I been successful in all things in life, I'd be a different person now than I am. And one of the things that things not going your way that failure, leads to is reflection. And, I could look at all those things that I had going in my head at the time and go, yeah, I probably could have had things more simplified and more focused, and I would have made the team, or I, should have been tempted by the skis or whatever it was. So the sponsorship. So I can look back at that and go, well, I gained a lot of wisdom from it, but also humility and focus and a sense of, self rather than self-identifying with the things I, did and the successes. I just thought of myself differently, and I think that's been good for me.
Yeah, you see that a lot in the military too, because you identify so much with the job.
Yeah, I'm a fighter pilot, and I'm going to be one till my dying day.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Then you get out, and guess what? No one cares anymore.
Yeah.
And you got to reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
Whether you get out after, your first tour of duty, or you stay 20 years and then you're stuck with that same reflection. So
yeah, it's really true. And that's one we had one of the interesting things, and one of the parallels being on a ski team like I was, or any team where it's like an elite team where you're the traveling team, that the right kind of team, you develop a lot of camaraderie and sort of this common purpose and common focus. And the same is true certainly in a fighter squadron. And then in a lot of, the military service branches, and especially guys that are, combat vets, combat oriented, that you develop a certain kind of camaraderie and teammanship, teamwork that it's pretty hard to replicate afterward in civilian life. And so I've had a couple of those chapters in my life that I'm really grateful for. But I think one of the things that, if I were to offer somebody advice who's in that situation, whether it's a sports team or the kind of really cool profession that you and I had, you have to realize that it's temporary, that it's a chapter of life. It's going to end, and those who pursue it to the ultimate end typically aren't the people that are happiest, with themselves in the end. Like I watched a lot of, old colonels and old generals become unhappy people versus guys that, lived it hard and went well when they were young and tough and in the heat of it. And they chose to walk out at a certain point that was, by their choice and rather than just being put out to pasture.
Yeah.
And that's true in sports. Guys that push it until they can't push it anymore, I think feel like they're put out to pasture rather than, going out when you're on top. I think it's good to separate your identity from what you're doing, first of all, but then secondly, to choose the moment and realize that everything is special, but enjoy the day, but also know that, this day is special and tomorrow may not be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you got hung up on that 88 Olympic, trial, think of all the things you would have missed out on that came next, So you just had to kind of regroup and press
well,
on
I'd already joined the military. And so I joined the Air Force. I enlisted in 1986. It was pretty funny. The guys have been trying to recruit me to join the Army National Guard through the years, because the military sends a team to these world championships for the military. They're called SISM, and so each year there's a military world championship for skiers, and there's a summer games one also. I'm pretty sure, but in the wintertime one, alpine skiing and cross country skiing and biathlon, and I think those are the main events there. But somewhere in Europe typically, and they were like, yeah, no, we'll pay you a ski race, and you're doing it anyway. Just join the Army. And I'd be like, I'm not going to join the Army. No. And so then one day somebody said, hey, have you ever thought about the Air Force? Because you could join the Air Guard. And the Idaho Air Guard has F4s. You can learn how to fly F4s. And I was like, what? What? I could do what? I was like, that sounds pretty cool. Tell me about that. And so, I looked into it and learned about it. And I was like, okay, and what's the best way? How do I do it? How do I make sure that I get to actually fly if I, sign up? And so they said, well, the best thing is to, enlist in the unit. And so, winter of '86, I went out to the Idaho Air Guard and talked to these recruiters, and I told them I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, everybody wants to be a fighter pilot. Good luck. And I'm like, yeah, well, I want to do that. So they're like, well, you have to sign up for something else, so what do you want to sign up for? You want to be like an ejection seat technician or, mechanic or, avionics? What sounds good to you? And I was like, yeah, all that. They all have like classes next to them, like, for 10 months in
like how long
Air
is your
Force
tech
Base
school?
or someplace like that. And I'd be like, well, so I got down to cook. There was no class, for cook. And I was like, okay, sign me up as a cook. They're looking at me like, what? Yeah, I signed up as an airman first class as a cook. And for 2 years, they paid me to ski race. And I never had to go to a cooking school. So that was how I got in. Then later when, each year the Air Guard units send 2 guys to Air Force Flight School. And so it's really a neat thing. If you succeed and get through Air Force Flight School, then you come back to that squadron, you fly, in my case, F4s, and guard squadrons get to do a lot of, they go to war. It's not, like the old days where it was just a flying club. It was a real thing. And so, so I was pretty excited about that prospect, and I just enlisted in the unit, and I'd go to, the drill weekends and stuff when I was in Idaho. And then, one time I got invited to come to the pilot selection board, and, I sat down across with these 4, flyers, and they're looking across at me like, who the fuck are you? And why are you here? And they're like, so let's get this. You joined this unit already as a cook? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, what are you going to do if we don't pick you? And I go, you're going to pick me. And they like that. They actually thought, okay,
they like that confidence.
This guy's cool. So they did. And then, the sadness of the '88 Olympic trial thing led me to a winter where I went to Europe anyway and skied and had a blast. You skied with the military team, and, spent the winter skiing with the Swiss national team in Switzerland, and working on my alpine skiing, and really fun stuff. And then, but I knew right after that I was going to go off to Air Force Flight School. So that's the way that wrapped up. So it was a bittersweet thing as far as biathlon went, but I also knew I was closing that chapter and moving on.
What a nice sunset tour in Europe.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Did you always want to be a pilot?
No, like I said, my dad had been a pilot, and he was a tough old Marine, funny guy that just being inside the family was a lot different than being outside the family. He was the heart of gold and give his shirt off his back to people outside the family, but being inside the family, you had to work for it and earn it.
Just a hard ass, yeah.
He just didn't know how to make things fun, and so, and in fact, I think took pleasure in not making things fun.
It's a Marine, right?
Yeah. So anyway, like one day I watched the movie The Great Santini, and I was like, oh yeah, now I get my old man now, a little bit different, a little bit better.
That's where they got the character.
Yeah. But he had a Cessna 170, and I'd flown with him in his airplane a little bit, but he didn't know how to explain it in a way that made it interesting or fun to the person that was doing it, and so I never really saw myself having anything to do with that. But then when the Air Force thing came up, that really hooked me, and I remember talking to my dad about it and going, he goes, oh yeah, that'd be a good deal. He goes, you're pretty good at getting good deals, aren't you? I'm like, yeah. So he got excited about it. And that actually, the fact that I ended up flying airplanes brought us a lot closer in a different way than, it was good.
Yeah. So how was pilot training for you?
Oh, it was fun. I mean, that was the coolest thing. Cause first of all, like, you were in the regular Air Force, right? Mm-hmm. So, it's different, your path, was fraught with the potential to not become a fighter pilot, you know, to be assigned to something else. And of course, everybody wants to be a fighter pilot, right? Well, not everybody, but most people that, you know, that's sort of what people aspire to. And, you know, depending on the class and in a regular Air Force flight training class, you know, 2 or 3 guys might get fighters and the other guys get tankers and cargo and whatever else, all of which turns out it's fun to fly at all. But
sure.
And there's some pretty cool stuff done with cargo planes that, you know, I wouldn't have ever thought of as a fighter pilot. But for me, I went in there knowing that if I succeeded, I was going to go back and fly F4s. And I was really excited about the F4. I mean, I'd been out and I'd been in the simulator, and I was just like, this thing was like with all these switches and this, you just could kind of sense the energy of it. And it wasn't even the real airplane yet. The real airplane was way beyond that. But I just was like, man, I can't, you know, watching Mach 1 go by, you're like, I can't believe I'm going to get to do this Mach 2.
Yeah.
And so I was genuinely excited about it. And I went to the Air Force Flight School with just this like light heart and, you know, a lot of just excitement. And that, you know, think about then, you know, sitting down across your instructor pilot and, you know, lieutenant or captain who's been, you know, first assignment instructor pilot. And I don't remember, you remember those guys?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you were one or not, but that was one of the options for those assignments was to become an instructor pilot. And so I remember these guys sitting across from me, like looking at the fact that I was excited about being there. And they're like, oh, if you make it, you're going to get to fly fighters. Well, good for you, lucky bastard. You know?
Yeah.
Anyway, but, so it started for me with, this guy, and he wasn't my regular instructor, but the dollar ride. Remember the dollar ride?
Oh, yeah.
My dollar ride was this guy sitting across there, and they were supposed to take you out and, you know, in the T-37, and it was supposed to be straight and level, and, you know, minimize, you know, potential for air sickness and whatever. And so he, you know, we're doing the brief, and I go, hey man, I've never been upside down in an airplane, and I'm just really excited. I want to see what that's like. He's like, oh, so you want to fuck around, huh? And I go, yeah. And he goes, didn't say anything, but so we went out and, did you T-37 for you or something?
They still had T-37s, but I did a program with the Navy and flew the T-34.
Oh, that's fun. That's really cool too. That's
Yeah.
a good place. Yeah.
So I missed the tweet.
Yeah. Well, the tweet was an interesting bird, but it was really fun to fly. And, you know, you could spins and all the aerobatics in it. And, so the first time in my dollar ride that we go out, you know, he's like, oh, you're doing good. Okay, I'll show you a roll. So we do an aileron roll. And I'm like, oh, that was cool. Oh, okay, here's a loop. We'll do a loop. And so before it's done, we've done everything. We've spun it and you know,
dollar
rolls and
ride.
loops, like, yeah, just like the full on, you know, full aerobatic thing. And we're high-fiving and he's hooting and hollering. And, you know, and we had so much fun that we kind of walked back to the squad and we're kind of like, you know, and so he always sought me out. You know, he wanted to fly with me anytime he could, and that turned into, you know, guys like that. When I had a lot of fun in the airplanes, you know. So.
Did you naturally have pretty good hands? Like, did you scoot through the syllabus with no problem?
I mean, I did some stupid stuff, you know, like
yeah.
because becoming a military pilot can be a little bit overwhelming at times, and there were times when I'm an imperfect person, so here I'm going like, well, I can't believe I did that, but is it okay?
Yeah.
So, after having taught myself some lessons, at least I usually didn't do a stupid thing more than once. So I did enough stupid things there that I know that
still made it through.
Yeah.
A lot of folks think that since you have a job with a guard unit or reserve unit, that you're guaranteed to go fly that fighter. And I've seen a ton of times where they decide that no, like that's not a good fit for you, and you can try to get a new job with a heavy unit, or maybe not at all. So you're like you're still on the chopping block a little bit.
For sure. Yeah. And so I survived that, but I also had a lot of fun. I mean, it was one of the best years of my life, just because I loved to fly, you know, and that's where I really confirmed that I loved to fly, and I had so much fun in the airplanes, and really appreciated the equipment that we got to fly. And then the solo flights were awesome. And it was just, it was all fun. And then, you know, coming back and getting in the F4, that was special. I mean, I knew, like, so late 80s, you know, we were in the RF4, the reconnaissance version, which was, as a young man, you know, you're thinking, oh, I wish this thing had, you know, guns. I mean, I want to shoot an airplane. I want an airplane where I can shoot a gun, or drop bombs. You know, we had air-to-air missiles, AIM-9 missiles on it. So we did a lot of air-to-air, ACM stuff and BFM stuff. And we had a branch of the weapons school here actually. So we flew F4s without anything on them, like hard wing F4 slicks, and we'd go out and do BFM and dogfight with them, and that was pretty amazing airplane. The guys that we're flying with were right out of Vietnam. I mean, by the late 80s, there were a lot of guys that had flown in Vietnam and were, riding out their careers in the Guard. And they were really good at flying the F4. So, I had the best guys in the world teaching me how to fly the F4.
That's so cool.
Fly it really hard, like purposely depart it. And, we call it a pirouette, where you'd get going slow and then kick the rudder and jack it around and, go a different direction. And really fun stuff.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure those guys have been flying like at, beyond the envelope.
Oh, yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
Going
and they
downtown.
To do it. That was just the way that they, that was the way we learned how to fly the airplanes.
Do you remember when like the F-16 and the F-15C started coming online? Did you ever overlap with those guys?
Oh, yeah.
Do some ACM?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah. And then, so the RF-4 was pretty fun, because it was one of the fastest fighters ever built.
Yeah, just
so
slick
A
wings.
true Mach 2 airplane, it was pretty cool. Or Mach 2.5, really, RF-4. And so we took those up to Canada one year, and we're flying against Canadian F-18s out of Cold Lake. And that was really fun because our, we're going against F-18s, and we're like, well, speed is our friend. So we'd come into the merge at Mach 1.5, and then the F-18s go, oh my God. So it was pretty fun just to, fly. We flew pretty hard up there, and we got to, surreptitiously, put each other in each other's airplanes. So I got to fly in the backseat of the F-18 a few times up there and do, I was like, God, this is totally cheating. This is easy to do this in this airplane. It's like, okay, I want to go right, the airplane goes right. I want to go left, the airplane goes left. And the F4, you have to use your feet. Like, oh. So anyway, but that was pretty fun. And then later, along the way, we thought we were going to move to the F-16 or something like that. We really hoped for the F-16, but we got word one day that we were going to go to the F-4G Wild Weasel, and that was like, what? And that turned out to be the coolest mission. I mean, it was so fun. The anti-surface air missile platform and the first airplane across the fence into whatever's going on, and last one out, and first in, last out. That was a pretty neat position to be in, and I loved that airplane. It was so fun to fly it. And they called the F-4G the Advanced Wild Weasel. They were 69 model F-4s, but they had really good avionics in them. It still had the F-4 radar, but the emissions receiving package that the thing had, the phased array antennas and the computer that processed it and the displayed, where things were in the sky. We had great situational awareness about where other fighters were that are really different from what you can, now I don't know what's out there, but when we were flying in the early 90s, we had a lot better SA, total SA, where people were than other guys did. So, and we had really also a unique ability to fight against guys with pulse Doppler radars, because we could go exactly 90 degrees to them. And so pulse Doppler radars, your signature's based on closure, but if you go 90 degrees and there's no closure and you turn everything off,
then, just disappear.
Then you disappear. Yeah. So we'd do this thing where we'd come into the merge, and we knew about the time that they're launching their AMRAMs. We'd go 90 degrees, and one guy'd pitch up, 10,000 feet. The other guy drop down to the bottom, and then time it. And I can't remember, it was like a minute and 15 seconds later, something like that. You pitch back into the fight, and roll in behind him and surprise him. So we put F-4s behind F-16s and F-15s, all the time. We shot them way more than they shot us, which was really fun. It was a cool way to go through those.
Yeah, you get those really experienced, Vietnam guys as your instructors.
Yeah,
they've got all the tricks, man.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then we also, got to go to the Middle East a lot with that, and I didn't go to the first Gulf War, but right after that, we started deploying to, and
Southern Watch, Northern Watch,
and provide comfort
okay.
in the north. Yeah, so we went to both Turkey and Saudi Arabia and flew into Iraq a lot, and that was pretty wild, pretty cool.
And then you guys transitioned to the mighty A10 Warthog.
The mighty Hog. Yeah. Yeah.
How was that for you?
That was weird. I mean, you know, when I say that, you know, the F4 was such a solid, I don't know. It's like, it wasn't fast in terms of like gaining acceleration. And if you get into a turning fight with a modern fighter, you know, you'd bleed airspeed faster than they would. And so there was a lot of things where it was a, you know, 69 model, you know, fighter, but it was still, you know, had this like cool responsive throttle. And when you lit the afterburners, you could like, it was just this amazing, you know, powerful thing, and dense and, you know, full of fuel and wires and shit, you know, and hydraulics, and just had this really kind of neat sound inside of it, you know, like this kind of humming sound that was just you could just feel it in I can still feel it in my bones when I think about it. That's the sound of the feel of the F4 when you're flying it. And then you go to the A10, and I came right out of the F4 as one of the first guys in our squadron to go to the A10 to go through the basic course, and then right into the instructor course to come back and, you know, be one of the first instructors in the squadron. And so we spent 7 months in Tucson learning to fly the A10, and fresh out of the F4, I was sitting in A10, you know, and started up, and even just the starting is just different and funny. They're holding, and you know, the canopy rails are down low, and the airplane kind of feels funny. The wings are out flat out there, and then you do the first brake check, and you feel like the airplane's going. It feels like it's on, you know, held together with bungee cords or something. It's like, wait a minute, what? And then,
it's like a big boat.
Yeah, and then when you take off, it's like, okay, is this all the fast where this thing goes?
Yeah,
you know, like you know, the throttle positions are fly and land, right? So
you have two positions.
Yeah, so it was really different, you know, to just jump in and learn how to fly that plane. But then, you know, it's not long before you shoot the gun and start dropping bombs. And, you know, the A10, you know, once it gets into you, it was a pretty incredible experience to get to fly that thing, for sure.
Yeah, doing CAS now in forward air controller mission, stuff like that, getting out of the air-to-air and seed stuff. It's like a whole new world, huh?
Yeah, it really was. And it was good for me. I mean, it was interesting in a weird way, like, you know, fast forward to my future, like with Eberlestock, I ended up having a lot of, you know, experience and exposure to the military, Army and Special Forces guys and AFSOC guys. And, you know, I had the later experience I have with the military. The A10 was my first window into that world, because in the F4 squadrons, you know, we were always thinking about the, you know, surface to air missile defense, or the, you know, the air to air, you know, combat stuff, and you know, rarely thought about the, you know, guys in the Army wherever on the.
It's a whole nother war, right?
Yeah, I was like, what? Yeah, let's down. Yeah, we'll protect them. But with the A10, you know, like you got fully, you know, versed in, you know, sort of the ground commander's objectives and supporting them, and, you know, kind of a close-up view of guys on the ground, and it was pretty cool. And again, sort of that first kind of the bridge that made my later thing made more sense to me when I started to. And I had a lot of guys, you know, that when I worked with them with Eberlestock, they're like, "Oh, you were a hog driver. Oh man, I love you."
Gives you like some credibility with the ground guys.
Yeah, you're for real. So anyway,
yeah. Well, that's awesome. Let's take a quick break. Hey guys, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. First up is Papa Bear Naturals. Papa Bear makes all natural personal care products. So stuff like beef tallow balm, toothpaste, deodorant, and it's all without any of the chemical additives that you get with the mass-produced corporate stuff. And it's also sourced from local small ranches like this one. So check them out at papabearnaturals.com. Also like to thank Buffalo Wool Company. They make the best socks I've ever worn in my life. They're comfortable, they're breathable, they last, and they're all sourced with American buffalo wool and manufactured in America. So buffalowoolcompany.com, check them out. Also like to thank my Patreon supporters. $5, you can get the show early and ad-free. So without further delay, let's get back to the show. So when did you start to like really see some traction with the company pick up?
Well, you know, like I spoke earlier about the buyer's response at the stores, and then I'd go in and, talk to the people, and it was interesting. I mean, my first pack design, that just one I mentioned, it had two really intuitive and obvious, components that made it special. One was, it was designed to be something that fit behind your body, like shoulder level and below, behind your torso, so you could, and be compact enough to be used as a day pack. So it had basic storage, but then it had like a midline zipper that split it open, where you could expand the wings open to pull a bigger pocket out to haul an elk quarter out of the woods. That was a unique concept, that hadn't been done before. And it had big compression straps, that were made to compress the load back. And it also had a rifle scabbard built into it, so you could dump your rifle in there and get it out when you wanted it. And, good ideas for sure. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people, and since then have thanked me for it and loved the concept that I brought forward.
Yeah,
but
my sorry to interrupt, but my buddy Braxton McCoy is a longtime Idaho guide.
Oh yeah.
And he was the first one that brought that to my attention. He's like, man, you don't want a sling and then that arm is isolated all the time.
Yeah.
He's like, get an Eberlestock pack. You just put it right there, and then your hands are free. It's like
you're much more mobile, and if you fall down, you can catch yourself. And there's
it's a genius.
It's just a much better way to
idea.
move. And then when you want your rifle, you pull it out. So that those were great concepts, but it took a long time for, some people were like amazed. They saw it immediately. So there's a certain amount of the market that was like, oh, geez, I've always wanted somebody that needed to do that. And thank God, I love it. And then there were others that were more skeptical. I had to teach people a new way of hunting, that took some time. But I knew that the first winter that I went to the SHOT Show, and I had the crowd around our booth, and that wasn't going on. And people come back, for 4 days of the show, they'd go, man, you have the only thing like this in this whole show. You know that, don't you? And I'm like, no, I didn't know that, but that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So I knew we had something special then. The next year I made a couple of products, I kind of perfected the just one into upgraded some ways of construction. And I, because nobody knew how to make packs the way that I wanted them to be made. I mean, I had to figure out how to make something that wouldn't break if you overloaded it. And so, that took a couple of years to get that sorted out and to start making things that were so strong that it surprised people that they could do, more than they'd been able to do with any other pack before. So by, 04, 05, another year or two into it, I started to kind of, feel like I was making some breakthroughs in terms of, the quality of the product, but also the response I was getting from some of the customers. And then after the second year, I had a guy suggest that I make, a pack with a bigger hole in it for carrying like an AR type gun. And I was like, well, okay, I thought about that. And so I did that. And then I thought, well, I'll make some in some solid colors, maybe police or military guys might want them. And, they still had like a bright logo on them, but I was like, well, and so that pack was called the Gunslinger. And, I guess it was about 2006. I got a call from a guy in the 3rd Special Forces group, and he was all excited. And of course, me on my cell phone. He's like, "Oh man," he goes, "I saw this pack at a shooting match. A guy had it, and we asked him where he got it, and they wanted to order a bunch and for their unit, and he goes, hey guys, I got to tell you, man, I can wear any pair of boots I want, I can shoot any gun I want, but your pack's the best thing that come our way in 30 years." And I was like, what? And
that's some good feedback.
It was amazing. Yeah. And I didn't realize that, by that point, we'd been at war for quite a while, and the Special Forces had big budgets, and I just figured that they had everything they needed. And so I was astonished to hear that I'd made something that made an impact like that on them, that they felt they needed. Because if you watch the movie American Sniper, that guy's going through the streets of Fallujah or someplace in Iraq with a scoped rifle strapped around his neck and an automatic weapon in his hands, and with a bunch of other guys in his platoon. And what was happening at the time was, first of all, that's not a great thing for mobility to have all your stuff in a scoped rifle, but also, the enemy snipers were a lot more Chechens that came down to kill Americans. And and they were good. They'd been killing Russians for a while. And you know, in the sniper game, snipers don't just kill anybody, but if they can see another sniper, they will definitely kill him.
High value target, right?
Yeah. So, you know, American snipers were getting shot a lot, and so my pack put the rifle away, so they're more mobile, and they looked like everybody else with an automatic weapon in their hands, but also it had a cap that went over the butt of the rifle, so it covered it up. And so for about a year and a half, you know, guys weren't getting shot. And so it was really cool. Then with the next, you know, after they started getting out there, like 07, 08, guys are coming back going, oh man, you know, you're saving lives, you know, there's this, what's going on. And I was like, oh, you know, you hear those words, that was like, oh man, it was amazing. And so, so then after a while, they started shooting the guys wearing Eberlestock packs because the snipers were. But by then, you know, we were all kind of brothers anyway. So, you know, but that really, the process of that opened my mind to, well, what else does the military need? So I started making, you know, different kinds of like modular systems and things that could expand to carry a drone or a robot or a box of, you know, ammo or whatever. And so, and radio packs, and, you know, just started experimenting with stuff. And everybody assumed that I was like a military sniper or something coming up with this, but I'm not. I was but if you think about it, the elegant evolution from biathlon, where I'm used to carrying a rifle on my back and doing things with my hands, to hunting for me, to the military, just made sense. And so I was really responsive. I'd listen to what guys said about the product. And if they ever said, hey, you don't need this, I'd go, okay, take that off. You know, what do you need? And so, but really, I've made a lot of products that made a lot of difference to the way guys went to war, really changed the way guys went to war all over the world. And then, you know, set the standard for other people to compete against me. And so a lot of other companies now have made, you know, better products than they would have otherwise made had I not done what I did. But still, we're really the best known for specialty military packs. And so the hunting side and the military side kind of rose alongside each other and complemented each other. You know, we've had an authentic footprint in both markets all the way along, or after the first couple of years, I'd say. And it's been really a great journey.
Yeah, come to think of it, a buddy of mine, Clay Martin, was a Green Beret, and he was also pushing your packs.
Yeah.
So from the hunting side, the military side, it makes sense. There's a lot of overlap there. Yeah, it's cool. Just all your background kind of led you to that point to be able to make these products that people need.
Yeah,
it's pretty wild. And so what you're doing now is pretty cool too. So it sounds like you hired a CEO, and you also have a few airplanes to fly.
Yeah.
Like kind of like every fighter pilot's dream retirement.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it worked out interesting. Like, you know, life just sort of leads to the next beautiful thing, you know. And I mentioned earlier that my dad had ranches, and when he retired from active cattle ranching, the last thing he did was bought an in-holding back in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the forest, in the ranch all by itself, and a big meadow in the middle of nowhere, and with a big airfield on it. And he died a few years ago, and I decided, before he was gone, I was going to keep that ranch. But we've used it with Eberlestock. You know, we haven't done it every year because it's a big deal, but we'll do it again. We have an epic party out there that we call Out There, where we bring our influencers and, you know, good friends and you know, 40 or 60 or 80 people out in the middle of nowhere, and have, you know, we do some flying events, but we also do a lot of shooting. You know, it's like long range shooting and shotgun and pistol, and then, you know, campfire stories at night. And it's just really good people having a good time. It's probably the best party in the world.
That's awesome.
And so, you know, so we do that, and the airplanes have, you know, provided a way to connect Boise to the backcountry. And also, you know, we've kind of integrated them into Eberlestock, and I intend to do more. You know, it's just, I've had, you know, kind of a whole, you know, cycle of life going alongside that slowed me down a little bit the last couple of years, but still, now I fell in love with de Havilland beavers, and you know, the best thing I've done as far as flying of anything has been I took a beaver amphibious float plane from Boise up to Seattle, and then up the Inside Passage to Alaska, to the top of Alaska, and down into the Brooks Range, and landed on a lake, and went out and killed a sheep and got it back and flew that thing back to, you know, and it was just an epic month-long, like, incredible journey and incredible trip. And with with a few hair-raising moments in there, flying the plane.
Oh, I
you know,
bet.
where it was like, whoa, you know. But I look back at that, like that was like the ultimate fulfillment of the spirit of adventure, and that really is what the airplanes represent to me, is the spirit of adventure. Like I love, you know, getting in one and the big radial engine taking me wherever it's going to take me, but going someplace like Alaska with one has been pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just want to say thanks for taking this time to talk with me.
Oh yeah.
Like I said, man, you've lived many lives within one life.
Yeah.
And just to share some of those lessons learned and experiences with my audience and with, you know, frankly, a lot of young people that aren't really sure what to do. I think that might give them a little bit of hope and a little bit of insight into the fact that it's
I was
still
a regular
possible.
guy. I mean, if I can say anything, I'm nothing special. I was a regular guy and just figured out, you know, that hard work led to good results and failure led to learning. And so you reapply and readdress and do it better the next time. And, I'm very fortunate, but I also can say that I got there just by, you know, vision, then deciding that if somebody was going to do it, it was going to be me, and then working my tail off to get there, you know, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you need a wingman or a co-pilot, you can call me. My flying hands are getting a little itchy.
Yeah, well, if you get a Super Cub, then you'll have something that goes about as slow as my airplane, so then we could probably do something. Yeah, that'd be good for the wingman part. But yeah, all right, man.
All right,
Thanks,
Glen Eberle, thank you very
I
much.
appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.